It was the winter of 1978 in Northern California. The kind of winter where the air feels sharp in your lungs, where the nights fall early, and where families huddle inside their warm homes, locking the doors against the chill. But on Friday, February 24th, 5 young men were not thinking about the cold. They were thinking about basketball. They were known in Yuba City as the boys. Not because they were children. No, each of them was a grown man in their 20s and 30s. But because they carried an innocence, a gentleness that made them seem forever young. Ted Weher was 32, a gentle giant with a soft laugh and a smile that could light up a room. But Ted wasn't quick to understand complicated things. He needed guidance, reminders, structure. His parents cared for him closely, and he was loved deeply. Jack Hewitt, just 24, was the baby of the group. He had a learning disability, but he never let it stop him. His loyalty to his friends was unshakable. If you were Jack's friend, you were his friend for life. William Bill Sterling, at 29, was serious, thoughtful. He could often be found with a Bible in his hands, reading out passages with a passion that his friends sometimes teased him for. But behind that seriousness was a man who cared deeply, who saw his friends as his chosen family. Jack Madruga, 30, was the steady one. A U.S. Army veteran, he was quiet, responsible, and proud of his independence. He had a driver's license, one of the only ones in the group, and he owned a car, a turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. Jack loved that car. He polished it, maintained it, and never let anyone else drive it. And then there was Gary Mathias, 25. Gary's life had been harder. He had served in the military too, but after his return, he had struggled. Schizophrenia haunted him. Medication kept him stable, and without it, his mind could spiral. But when Gary was with the others, he seemed calm, grounded. His parents would later say these 4 friends were the best thing that ever happened to him. They gave him belonging. Together, these 5 men were not outcasts. They were not forgotten. They were the boys. They played on a local team called the Gateway Gators, a special Olympic-style basketball team for adults with disabilities. And they loved that team more than anything. That Friday night, they had one mission: to drive to Chico, California, about 50 miles away, to watch UC Davis play basketball. It wasn't just about the game. It was about the excitement, the fun, the chance to be together. And there was something else. Tomorrow morning, the boys had their own tournament. Their uniforms were pressed, their gear bags ready. Their mothers had laid out snacks, packed water bottles. These boys were going to play, and they were going to win. So when they climbed into Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego that night, they carried with them not just the thrill of a basketball game, but the anticipation of their own moment of glory. The Montego purred along the quiet California highways. Inside the car, laughter bounced back and forth. Jokes, stories, the same playful teasing they'd shared for years. Jack Madruga kept both hands firmly on the wheel. He never let anyone else drive his car. Gary fiddled with the radio, looking for music. Ted and Jack Hewitt shared candy bars. Bill talked about how excited he was for tomorrow's game, about how he'd prayed for their victory. To anyone watching, it was just 5 friends enjoying a night out. They reached Chico safely. Witnesses later recalled seeing them at the basketball arena. They cheered, clapped, and smiled. Their passion was unmistakable. After the game, the boys stopped at a convenience store. It was late, just before midnight. They bought candy bars, soda, a few cartons of milk, The clerk remembered them clearly. 5 happy young men, arms full of snacks, joking with one another. And then, just like that, they were gone. They climbed back into the Mercury Montego and drove off into the cold February night. By dawn, their families began to worry. The boys should have been home. They should have been laying out their uniforms, lacing up their shoes, preparing for their big day. But their beds were empty, their rooms silent. One by one, the families called each other. "Have you seen the boys?" "No, we thought they were with you." No one came home. By morning, panic was spreading. The Yuba County Five had vanished. And when days later their car was discovered in the snowy mountains, miles from where they were supposed to be, investigators realized this was no ordinary disappearance, because the evidence inside that car made no sense. Not then. Not now. Not ever. The morning after the game should have been one of the happiest mornings of their lives. The Gateway Gators had been waiting for this day, their big basketball tournament, the day they would finally step onto the court and prove that all their practice, all their teamwork meant something. But when the families awoke on Saturday, February 25th, 1978, something was terribly wrong. In 5 separate homes across Yuba County, mothers called out their sons' names. "Gary, time to get ready." "Ted, come on, you don't want to be late." "Jack, the game's today, remember?" But the bedrooms were silent. The uniforms still lay folded on chairs. The sneakers sat neatly by the doors. The gear bags were packed and ready, but untouched. The beds had not been slept in. The realization spread like ice through their parents' hearts. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. By mid-morning, the phone calls began. Jack's mother called Ted's house. Ted's parents called Gary's. Gary's called Bill's. Each family thought maybe the boys had spent the night at another's home. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Maybe they got back late from the game, decided to crash at Jack's or at Ted's. But one by one, each parent gave the same answer. No, he never came home. By 11 a.m., panic had set in. The boys never missed their commitments, especially not something as important as this tournament. It wasn't just basketball. It was their identity, their pride, their joy. By afternoon, the police were contacted. At first, the authorities brushed it off. After all, these were 5 grown men. Maybe they'd gone off on their own. Maybe they'd decided to take a road trip, but their families insisted. "No, you don't understand." These boys were creatures of routine. They lived for structure. And above all, they would never miss their game. The families knew, with a certainty that pierced their hearts, something was terribly wrong. The police began by looking for Jack. Madruga's Mercury Montego. The car was distinctive, turquoise and white, well kept, impossible to miss. If they could find the car, they would find the boys. But searches through the roads between Chico and Yuba City turned up nothing. No sign of the car. No sign of the boys. It was as if they had simply vanished into the night. That night, while neighbors lit lamps and police made half-hearted calls, the families sat awake, staring at front doors that never opened. Ted's parents clutched his photograph, whispering prayers into the silence. Jack Hewitt's mother sat at the window all night, watching the street, certain she would see headlights any moment. Gary's parents paced the living room, terrified that without his medication, their son might spiral into confusion or worse. Every creak of the house, every car passing outside, made their hearts leap, only to be crushed again. For the families, this wasn't just fear. It was agony. The kind of agony only parents know when their child is out there somewhere in the dark. And they cannot help. Days passed. Then, a break came. On Tuesday, February 28th, a forest ranger reported something unusual, an abandoned car, spotted high in the Plumas National Forest, near Auroville, miles away from any direct route between Chico and Yuba City. The ranger said it looked stuck, left in the snow. The description matched Jack's beloved Mercury Montego. The family's worst fears began to harden into a terrible reality. When investigators reached the spot, they couldn't believe their eyes. There, sitting on a deserted mountain road, half buried in snow, was the Montego. It was more than 70 miles from Chico, not just out of the way, but in the wrong direction entirely. The car seemed fine. It wasn't wrecked. It wasn't even truly stuck. The snow around the tires was packed down, but not so badly that the car couldn't have been pushed free. Any of the boys, especially 5 of them together, could have moved it easily. Inside, the keys were gone, the doors unlocked. The candy wrappers and cartons from the convenience store still sat on the seats, and yet there was no sign of the boys. Why would they drive here? Why abandon the car when it could have been freed so easily? Where had they gone, in the freezing snow, with no heavy coats, no food, no supplies? As investigators stood by that lonely car, staring into the silent forest, one thing became clear. The Yuba County Five hadn't just disappeared. They had stepped into a mystery that, even now decades later, refuses to be solved. The abandoned Mercury Montego sat like a ghost in the snow, miles from where it should have been. For investigators, it was the first real clue. For the families, it was the beginning of a nightmare. The car was found high in the Plumas National Forest, near a mountain road that led deeper into the wilderness. It was a place none of the boys knew. They weren't campers. They weren't hikers. They weren't OU to DO or SME. Ted and Jack had never even spent a night in the woods. Gary, with his condition, wouldn't have handled the cold. Bill disliked the outdoors. And Jack Madruga, the driver, was terrified of snow. His mother swore he would never have driven up there on his own. Never. So what were they doing there? As soon as the car was found, the search exploded. Police, sheriffs, forest rangers, even volunteers from neighboring counties, all combed the snowy wilderness. Helicopters swept overhead, their blades chopping the silence of the forest. Dogs sniffed through the underbrush. Volunteers shouted the boys' names until their voices cracked, but the mountains were merciless. The snow was deep. The nights were freezing. And everywhere they looked, they found nothing. Back home, the families could do nothing but wait. Ted's mother sat in her living room, clutching the rosary beads until her fingers bled. Jack Hewitt's father drove up to the search site every morning, begging the police to look harder. Gary's stepfather whispered to reporters, "If he doesn't have his medicine, I don't know what will happen." Every day that passed felt like a lifetime. Investigators studied the car more closely. The gas tank was a quarter full. They hadn't run out of fuel. The battery was charged. The engine was fine. Jack Madruga had been careful with his car. He wouldn't have abandoned it unless something forced him to. Inside the glove compartment were folded maps of California. But none were unfolded. Why hadn't they used them? And perhaps strangest of all, the car wasn't really stuck. Yes, there was snow packed under the wheels, but not so much that 5 men couldn't have freed it. It seemed as if They had just walked away. Searchers soon found something else. Footprints, faint, almost erased by the snow. But there, the tracks seemed to lead deeper into the forest, toward the mountains. But after a short distance, they disappeared. The snow had covered them, or the men had split up. No one could say. Silence of the woods pressed down on everyone. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. For weeks the search continued. Every trail, every ravine, every frozen creek. But the woods gave nothing back. No bodies, no clothing, no supplies. It was as if the 5 men had stepped into the trees and simply vanished. By March, despair had set in. The families refused to give up, but hope was fading. Reporters asked Jack's mother, "What do you think happened?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know. But my boy wouldn't have gone up there. Somebody took them. Somebody lured them." Gary's parents echoed the same fear. They knew their son's struggles. He wouldn't have survived long in the cold without his medicine. If he was still alive, he was suffering. The search slowed. Snowstorms came. The mountains closed in. Boys were gone. Then came spring. As the snow melted, secrets began to emerge. In early June, a group of motorcyclists exploring the mountains stumbled upon a small Forest Service trailer, deep in the wilderness, nearly 20 miles from where the car had been found. What they found inside that trailer would shock investigators, horrify the families, and turn the Yuba County Five into one of America's strangest mysteries. Because inside that trailer, there were answers. But those answers only raised darker, more terrifying questions. The snow had finally begun to melt in the Northern California mountains. It was early June, nearly 4 months since the Yuba Five had vanished. Most people had given up hope. The search had quieted. The families were still grieving, still praying, but deep down, they feared the truth. Their sons were gone. And then, a discovery was made. On June 4th, a group of motorcyclists rode deep into the wilderness of the Plumas National Forest. They weren't looking for the boys. They were just exploring, enjoying the trails now open after the long winter. But what they stumbled upon would change everything. Hidden among the trees, nearly 20 miles from where the car had been abandoned, stood a small Forest Service trailer. It was a kind of emergency shelter, used by park rangers during off-season maintenance. Inside, there were bunks, blankets, and canned food, enough to sustain life for weeks. And inside that trailer lay the answer to what had happened to at least one of the missing men. The smell hit them before they saw it. That awful, heavy smell of death that no one forgets. On one of the bunks lay the body of Ted Wire. He was stretched out on the bed, wrapped tightly in 8 sheets, almost as if someone had tried to protect him from the cold. His shoes were missing. His body was badly emaciated, suggesting he had survived for weeks before finally succumbing. His beard growth indicated he had lived at least 13 weeks after disappearing. By his side were neatly stacked personal items: a wallet, a ring, a necklace. Everything in order, but the most horrifying detail was this: in that trailer, only feet away from Ted's wasted body were over 30 unopened cans of food. He had starved to death in a place stocked with enough supplies to keep him alive. The trailer contained more than just food. There were matches, there was fuel, there were blankets and clothes, but none of it had been touched. The cans of food were still sealed. The fuel for heating was untouched. Even the broken window that had been used to gain entry hadn't been. properly covered. It was as if the boys had entered the trailer and then failed to use anything that could have saved their lives. Why? When investigators told Ted's family, his mother collapsed. She couldn't understand. Her son had been so close to safety, yet he had died of starvation and exposure. The other families were struck with a different kind of horror. If Ted had made it there, what about the others? Were they out there too, lost in the mountains, waiting to be found? Over the next few days, more discoveries were made. About 5 miles from the trailer, searchers found the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. Their bodies had been ravaged by animals, scattered in the underbrush. One was partially inside a forested area, the other down a small slope. Both appeared to have died from exposure. Nearby, 2 miles from the trailer, the skeletal remains of Jack Hewitt were found, but one man was never found, Gary Mathias. Only his sneakers were discovered inside the trailer, suggesting he had been there. But his body has never been recovered to this day. The discoveries only deepened mystery. Why had the men gone up into the mountains in the first place? Why abandon a perfectly good car when they could have freed it easily? Why march miles into the snow without warm clothing? Why, after finding the trailer, had they failed to open the cans of food, or use the heating, or protect themselves from the cold? And above all, where was Gary Mathias? The families wanted closure, but closure never came. Instead of answers, the trailer brought only more questions. Because if Ted had survived for 13 weeks, if the others had died scattered in the forest, then what had really happened on that mountain? And why does the story of the Yuba County Five still feel like a puzzle with half the pieces missing? By the summer of 1978, the official search for the Yuba Five had ended. 4 bodies had been recovered. One, Gary Mathias, was still missing, but the questions, they never ended. This was no ordinary disappearance, no ordinary tragedy. Everything about this case screamed contradiction. And so, investigators, families, and amateur sleuths began to ask, what really happened to the Yuba County Five? The simplest explanation was that Jack Madruga had simply taken a wrong turn. Driving home from Chico, perhaps he'd missed the exit, or confused the roads in the dark, and somehow ended up in the mountains. But the families didn't believe it. Jack hated the snow. He had never once driven into the mountains, not even in daylight, not even in good weather. His mother swore he would not have gone up there on his own. And even if he had taken a wrong turn, why keep driving nearly 70 miles out of the way? Why keep going up a lonely mountain road instead of turning back? It didn't make sense. Others suggested something darker, perhaps. The boys had encountered someone at the game, or at the convenience store afterwards, who convinced them, or forced them, to drive into the mountains. Could it have been stranger? A hitchhiker? Someone they knew? Gary Mathias's name came up often. Unlike the others, Gary had a troubled past. He had been in the military, and he struggled with schizophrenia. At times, when off his medication, he could become aggressive or paranoid. Did Gary lead them into the mountains? Did he panic? Snap? But those who knew Gary insisted he was calm around the boys. He depended on them. They grounded him. And even if he had suggested going into the mountains, why would the others who feared snow and hated camping have agreed? Some investigators pointed to the service trailer. Perhaps the boys had become stranded. Maybe they believed they couldn't move the car, so they set off to find shelter. When they found the trailer, they tried to survive, but without the knowledge or ability to use what was inside. That could explain Ted's tragic death. He had starved, unable to open cans of food that required a special military-style can opener. Maybe none of the boys knew how. But then, why had Gary's sneakers been left inside? Gary had grown up with military training. He would have known how to use the can opener. He would have known how to light the stove. So where was Gary? Whispers of foul play began to spread. Some suggested the boys had witnessed something they weren't meant to see, maybe a crime, maybe a drug deal gone wrong, and had been chased into the mountains. Others pointed to a violent local man known to police. He lived not far from where the car was found. He had a reputation for cruelty, and his own family claimed he had admitted, drunkenly, to being involved, but no evidence was ever found. No charges were ever filed, and the condition of the bodies, starvation, exposure, fear, suggested a slow, tragic death, not murder. The more investigators studied the case, the stranger it became. Why did they abandon a perfectly good car when they could have pushed it free? Why walk 20 miles into the mountains with no warm clothing in the dead of winter? Why not eat the canned food? Why not light the stove? Why wrap Ted so carefully, sheet after sheet, if they had already given up? And most haunting of all, where was Gary Mathias? For the families, the theories meant little. Ted's mother wept when she heard the details of his death, starving in a trailer filled with food. Jack Hewitt's father never forgave himself for not being able to protect his son. Gary's parents spent years leaving their porch light on every night, hoping he would come walking up the steps. Theories didn't bring back their boys. They only made the pain worse. And so the story of the Yuba County Five became more than just a tragedy. It became a riddle, a haunting puzzle, a modern American Dyatlov Pass, a case so bizarre, so full of contradictions, that even today, nearly half a century later, people cannot agree on what really happened that night. And as long as Gary Mathias remains missing, the story will never truly have an ending. The mountains had given back their dead, but not all of them. 4 of the Yuba Five had been found, starved, frozen, lost. But Gary Mathias was still missing. His sneakers inside the trailer were the only trace. His body has never been discovered. For the families, this was not closure. It was torment. Ted Wayher's mother could barely speak of her son's death. The image of him wasting away in a trailer filled with food haunted her until her last breath. "He didn't deserve to go like that," she whispered. None of them did. Jack Hewitt's parents buried what little was left of their son. His bones, scattered by animals, had been collected carefully, reverently. His father never forgave himself. He said every night, "I should have been there. I should have gone with him." Bill Sterling's family clung to their faith. They believed their son had gone to a better place, but even so, the pain of his absence hollowed out their lives. Jack Madruga's beloved Mercury Montego was eventually towed back down the mountain. But his mother refused to look at it again. For her, it was a coffin on wheels. And Gary's parents, they never stopped searching. For years, every report of a sighting gave them hope. A man matching Gary's description was seen in Oregon. Another was spotted in Florida. A drifter in Canada looked just like him. Each time, investigators checked. Each time, the trail went cold. His parents kept the porch light on for decades. In case he came home. In case he walked up those steps. One last time. But he never did. As the years passed, The Yuba County Five became more than just a local tragedy. Reporters began calling it America's Dyatlov Pass, comparing it to the famous case in Russia where hikers had died under mysterious, contradictory circumstances. Documentaries, newspaper features, podcasts, each tried to make sense of it. Each came up short, because this case has no sense, no resolution, no neat ending. Some believe the boys panicked, simply lost in the snow. Some believe Gary's schizophrenia played a role, leading them astray. Some whisper of foul play, of strangers, of violence never proven. But the truth? The truth is that 5 young men, innocent, hopeful, excited about a basketball game, vanished into the night and were found in the most inexplicable circumstances imaginable. And nobody, not then, not now, can explain why. The families of the boys passed away one by one, taking their grief with them. Neighbors still remember their sorrow. Old detectives still shake their heads, haunted by the case that made no sense. For those who study mysteries, the Yuba Five are a lesson in humility. Some puzzles cannot be solved. Some questions will always echo in the silence. And for the people of Yuba County, the story is not just a mystery, it is a scar. A wound that never healed. So what happened on that cold night in February 1978? Did they simply get lost? Did someone lead them astray? Did madness, fear, or something darker drive them into the mountains? No one knows. What we do know is this: 5 men left home that night, laughing, joking, looking forward to basketball. Only 4 came back, broken, frozen, gone. And one, Gary Mathias, vanished into history. Even now, nearly half a century later, the questions remain. Why did they go up the mountain? Why didn't they eat the food? Why didn't they light the fire? Why did they abandon the car? And what happened to Gary Mathias? The forest is silent. The mountains keep their secrets. And the story of the Yuba County Five remains one of America's most haunting, unsolved mysteries.